Welcome to another episode of Stand on Guard. It's Wednesday, July 17th, and when we come back, the corporate greed at CBC is just too much.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Yes, please smash that like button. Help us to overturn the YouTube suppression of every video I put out in the last 5 days. Tired of talking about it. Thanks for your support. You guys are wonderful. And I really appreciate you being with me here today. So much to talk about. We're going to start with CBC. We're going to then talk about Chrystia Freeland's predicament and how Trudeau has also overspent your money on public servants. And then we're going to talk a bit about the aftermath of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump and how impoverished, how security impoverished can the Secret Service really be? How incompetent can it be? And we'll look at some of the testimony of this director, Kimberly Cheadle, and we'll say, nobody ever gets fired in the government. Nobody ever has to resign. But looks like Chrystia Freeland might be in that position. And I'm going to end the broadcast with a great clip from last night's day 2 of the Republican National Convention, which I'm following every night. You might have seen my report I did last night on Kennedy and Trump working together. That's huge news. It's been virtually ignored by the mainstream media. You'll only see this story on social media, and particularly on Elon Musk's X. I don't say formerly known as Twitter. Only I think it's time to get past that. but but it has been virtually ignored by legacy media and is only being discussed on social media platforms, especially X. So hope you had a chance to watch that last night. It's finally getting some recognition, finally getting some views. I put it out last night in the midst of the Republican National Convention, which was just gearing up at that time. But this clip I have that I really want to show you, and if I'm stalling a bit at the beginning here, it's because I'm just waiting for the numbers because I inadvertently said this broadcast was going to be 11 p.m. tonight, not 11 a.m. So I'm just hoping viewers catch up with me here. So before I get into the guts of this broadcast, but this clip from a woman named Madeline, and her last name escapes me at the moment, but it is announced at the convention, so you will hear her first and last name before she speaks. This might have been the most incredible, the most passionate, the most riveting speech yet delivered at the RNC. And what I really like about what they're doing this year is that they're allowing the average folk, the common folk, as Dean Martin said, I played at a common folk. They're letting the average American get up there and speak for 5 or 6 minutes. So you don't hear endless congressmen, congresswomen, senators, and party officials. Or you don't see Donald Trump Jr. and Lara Trump up there, or Donald Trump with his girlfriend going on for hours and hours and hours, and like the last convention, which was really bizarre. Really bizarre. Not as bizarre as the Democratic convention, which was all virtual. And we saw Joe Biden sitting in his basement, but it was bizarre. This year is completely different. And you're seeing a Republican Party that's not only energized, it is electric with the knowledge that they've got the right man in charge of the party, the right man who is going to run for president, the right man who got through an assassination attempt with grace and vigor and real style, if you can say that. I've never seen anybody emerge from an assassination attempt stronger. But you know what? He sits there at the convention looking so humble. I've never seen Donald Trump look humble. I always had a little, I always had problems with Donald Trump as much as I liked what he was doing to the Democrats. But this whole experience really seems to have changed him for the better and shaped his character in a way I think nobody anticipated. So he is a much better man as a result of this. And you can see that. And you can see the love in the room for him from these delegates and from the people who were there to support him. And it's really quite an experience to watch. But I want you to watch this clip later because it's absolutely, as I said, passionate and riveting. As this woman who used to be a lifelong Democrat and who's now supporting Donald Trump, I think for me, she's emblematic. She embodies the Trump voter who is fed up, as she said, with being fed up with voting for Democratic city bosses, fed up with voting for Joe Biden, who was always a bloody white supremacist in his junior years in the Senate, supported white supremacists in the Senate, supported Jim Crow people, supported segregated schools. And now, of course, he's the friend of every black person out there, and he's out there suggesting that white supremacists are the major danger, the major threat to America. The man is just so full of BS, so full of garbage that it's hard to watch him. But you see these people at this convention, these black men and women coming forth and saying, or Hispanic men and women saying, we're not beholden to Joe Biden or the Democratic Party. They've done nothing for us except stab us in the back. All right, let's get to CBC. I think we've caught up with some viewers here. This is fascinating because Pierre Poilievre has reiterated his commitment to defund the CBC. And he says, can't wait to turn their headquarters into housing. And of course, they have revealed that, yep, they're getting their their multi-million-dollar bonuses for the corporate bosses, for the executives. And this is an organization that's now getting $1.4 billion of your taxpayer money every year. But it's got lots of money left over to pay for corporate bonuses for an organization that continues to go downward. It's a downward spiral. Fewer and fewer people are watching the CBC, listening to the CBC, accessing their website because they don't trust the CBC to deliver the news, and they're fed up with paying for it. There's some great reporters at the CBC, and I've known throughout my journalism career some very good reporters at the CBC. And the CBC could probably do a much better job if it didn't have government funding and it was forced to justify itself through ad revenue or wherever it could find money in the private sector instead of relying on the government to keep bailing it out and relying, or I'm not going to say relying, on having to put up with executives like Tait, who just throw the money out to the upper echelon and think there's no problem here. Anybody have a problem with this? She says. Well, don't, because that's the CBC has always operated this way. The CBC has always operated to the tune of billions of taxpayer dollars, and yet they still have commercials. Is there a disconnect here, or is it just me? I've always said this about the CBC. You need 1.4 now billion dollars a year. You still need your ad revenue, and you still can't make it. You're still falling behind. And yet you have money to give to your corporate people. Let's listen to Catherine Tait and Alberta Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, who is the Conservative Party critic for Heritage, where CBC, of course, falls under. Let's hear them spar over this a couple of months ago when Catherine Tait denied she knew anything about corporate bonuses.
Answer. I absolutely do not know the answer until I've had those deliberations with the board of directors. I cannot preemptively say what the results of a future conversation will be.
Sure, 39 seconds. You know what the recommendation is. You know what the recommendation is going forward to the board.
I think I've repeated myself enough to say these are matters that concern the organization that operates at arm's length like all Crown corporations, and I have to be respectful.
Confirm that you are the senior member of the management team, which makes the decisions, and then those decisions get recommended to the board, which you are a member of the board. Therefore, you have access to information.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this question has been asked, I think, 6 times now.
I was about to mention that I think the question has been clearly asked and the answers have been clearly given, and so I think Ms. Thomas has got, she's got literally about 2 seconds left. Finish.
So, Chair, I just point of, I guess, response to the point of order, since you're ruling it in favor. I just want to be sure then, no repeat questions are permitted at this table is the ruling of the Chair?
I don't think that was what the member suggested. I think he suggested that the question had been repeated over and over.
Okay.
The witness had answered over and over, and it was getting to be repetitious because the question was the same and the answers were exactly the same.
Thank you. Point of order, Chair. I'm just looking for a ruling. What would be the number of times that would be appropriate to repeat a question?
There is no set number of times, but as a chair, I may decide on how the meeting moves forward.
So there you go, Hetty Fry, the old leftist from Vancouver, completely interrupting, completely inserting herself in that meeting, never getting an answer from Catherine Tait. Of course, we all knew what the answer was. Yes, they're going to go ahead with their bonuses. This is a greedy corporation. This is a corporation that is self-destructing, and they're aiding and abetting that self-destruction with this irresponsible behavior. And thank God Poilievre has come out and said, hey, enough. We're recommitting our pledge to defund the CBC. I always said, after Pierre Poilievre won the leadership, and I supported Poilievre winning that leadership, I thought he was the only viable candidate in terms of somebody who at least was enunciating principled conservative ideas and policies, and had the good chance, a very excellent chance of winning the next election. You have to meet both criteria. You can't just be somebody with the right ideas and the right policies if you don't have a hope in hell of beating the Liberals and the NDP in the next election. Pierre Poilievre had that, and I supported him as a columnist at the time for the Western Standard. And I think I would still say that was the right choice. It was the only choice to make. And I always said, though, that Poilievre backs away from his commitment to defund the CBC. Something is wrong. There's something askew here. We can't trust the guy if he does that, because that is a litmus test for Pierre Poilievre. And if he suddenly starts to say, well, maybe we can keep the CBC in a partial form. Maybe we can continue to subsidize the CBC at 75% and it has to pay the rest. But to say it again, to emphatically say, and here he is, emphatically say on your X feed, we're going to defund the CBC. To me, he's passed the litmus test and he's going to follow through on this. And I think that is absolutely what he needed to do. And the CBC is essentially committing suicide by, at this point, saying, hey, yeah, we took the money and we ran. We gave it to the top executives. And and what did they do to deserve it? You know, in government, you get a bonus if you do a really good job. And who judges whether you do a really good job? Well, another public servant. So you have public servants judging other public servants about how great they're doing their job. And of course, they're all doing wonderful jobs, even though the corporation itself might be faltering, even though the CBC is clearly not competing well in the new media market. It doesn't even seem to get it. It doesn't seem to even comprehend that the media market has changed. It's transformed. It's not the media market of 10 years ago. Certainly not the one of 20 or 30 years ago. That's the one Justin Trudeau is always telling us, oh, I wish we could go back to that, where we just had the CBC, CTV, maybe global. and a couple of national newspapers. It was so nice back then. I understood it. We're not going back there. And this is why Trudeau is trying to implement censorship policies, because he thinks he can strangle the new media and he can just eradicate independent media like this station here, and it's all going to go away. And it's going to go back to those halcyon days of 3 television networks and a handful of dailies and radio stations. No internet. And that's where Trudeau wants, because he can control that much easier than he can control or seeks to control the new media and the social media platforms. So how else is Justin Trudeau spending your tax dollars unwisely? Well, this is fascinating. Under Trudeau, the civil service has grown twice as fast as Canada's population. Let that sink in for a minute. Trudeau has increased the growth of this public service, government employees union, at a faster rate than Canada's population has grown. He has hired more public servants than any previous prime minister in history. And just have a look at this. And I'll read this for you. As of March 31st, the federal government's payroll included 376,772 personnel, according to data just published by the Federal Treasury Board. On March 31st, 2015, the last full fiscal year that the Harper Conservatives were in power, the civil service population was 257,034. That's an average annual growth rate of more than 3.6%, or double Canada's average annual population growth in the same period of about 1.6%. This is from the Global News Report by David Aiken, an old friend of mine from the Sun News days, who is generally a damn good reporter. The civil service grew by more than 6% in both 2021 and 2023. By comparison, the size of the civil service shrank in each of the last 5 years the Harper Conservatives were in power. That says so much. So it continues to grow under Trudeau. And what's the end? Where does this ultimately lead? Well, it leads to communism, where everybody's working for the government or everybody's dependent upon the government. And we might be getting there in a slow way. It might be happening very slowly and incrementally, but that's where we're headed up, into a communist state. That's what Justin Trudeau is imagining here. Now, is there anybody ever take responsibility for this stuff? And here's where I want to get into the last thing here about Chrystia Freeland. Yes, when somebody can't tell you whether or not they've got a job, that means they don't have a job. That means they're probably on their way out. But as I said at the beginning of this broadcast, does anybody ever have to resign from the government anymore? Does anybody ever have to leave or get fired for incompetence? Well, Chrystia Freeland might be the first in a long time. But if you look at the latest information out about U.S. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle, that last name I think is significant, she was responsible for one of the most catastrophic exercises and sheer incompetence in the history of the Secret Service, as they virtually stood by, no, not virtually, as they stood by, literally stood by, watched a shooter climb a building, get into a prone position, and prepare to assassinate former President Donald Trump. The Secret Service and the local police, I don't care who you want to blame, did nothing. The Secret Service explaining that, well, that building that the shooter was on top of, that wasn't our area of perimeter. That was outside of our perimeter. That's BS. If you're protecting the president, you double, triple check that building has been secured, that there's nobody on top of the roof with a gun. And clearly, local police and Secret Service were notified about that by a lot of eyewitnesses. They did nothing. And if the Secret Service has a policy that they will not fire until fired upon, or until they fire upon the president, that is called insane. That's called a recipe for assassination. And if that's the rules of engagement, the ROE that they're operating under, then they better change the rules of engagement and they better fire, or this current director had better resign because she has run the organization completely incompetently. But guess what? There might be some justice, and I say this jokingly, because Chrystia Freeland might be out as the Minister of Finance. After all she's done for Justin, after she's put her reputation on the line defending his stupid capital gains tax, which is turning out to be a disaster. Let's listen to how Freeland doesn't tell the reporter that she's on the way out. She's going to be fired.
There have been multiple reports that the Prime Minister's office is questioning your abilities as finance minister. Has Mr. Trudeau raised concerns about your performance with you?
The Prime Minister's views are really something you should ask the Prime Minister about.
Did you receive assurances from him that you will be staying on as finance minister?
The Prime Minister is a very eloquent man and leader, and it's for the Prime Minister to speak for himself.
Or was that a yes or no as to whether you had received assurances that you will be continuing as finance minister?
I do have the confidence that I need to do my job effectively.
Was that a yes or a no? Well, clearly she's not answering the question. That's exactly the way Trudeau sounded when he was asked about whether or not he was going to hire Mark Carney to do the finance minister job and whether Freeland was out. He wouldn't say no. I have full confidence in Chrystia Freeland as a finance minister. He said, "Oh, we just love Chrystia, yeah, and she'll always have a job here." What, mopping the floors? But that is exactly the way Trudeau talked. And when if you've been watching politics for more than a couple of years, you know how politicians talk when it's over, when they're going to be fired, when they're being told to resign or being told to move on, or they're going to get a lesser portfolio and the sun is setting for them. They start to talk like this. "Oh, yes, yes, yes. The Prime Minister has full confidence in me." And yes, you talk to the Prime Minister, ask the Prime Minister. He's a very eloquent man. Trudeau is just about anything but an eloquent man. He's a tongue-tied man at the best of times when he doesn't have a script in front of him. And even when he has a script in front of him, he often can't read the script very well, much like Joe Biden. So I would say this is Chrystia Freeland saying she is on the way out. And that is quite clear to me. I want to end the show here with a clip from last night's Republican National Convention, because as I said, as I've been saying all week, what happens in the U.S. impacts what happens in Canada. And if Donald Trump is ascendant in the United States, conservative forces are ascendant in Canada. This is good news for Canada because Donald Trump is addressing the same common sense conservative concerns that Pierre Poilievre is in Canada. And I would argue that Maxime Bernier is as well. Obviously, I think we know who's going to win that next election. Maxime Bernier told me the same thing in conversation last week. He expects Poilievre to win a majority government in the next election, and he thinks that's a good thing because that way Poilievre will have to follow through on his promises. There will be no excuse. But I'll tell you, if Donald Trump wins this election, it's going to create such a sense of optimism, such a sense of change, such a sense that the globalist elites can be defeated, that these democratic elites in the States can be stopped, that the woke ideology can be stemmed, that the insanity that's coming out of the White House and out of Parliament Hill can be silenced. And we can move on to those broad sunlit horizons that Winston Churchill talked about during the Battle of Britain. But it's the same thing. We are in a battle, a culture war right now. And if Donald Trump beats those odds, beats those people who have been trying to put him in prison, who have been trying to bankrupt him, that have been trying to ruin him in every way possible, it's a victory for freedom everywhere, including Canada. Now, I want you to watch this clip from this woman here. I think she is fantastic. And her words are just invigorating, challenging, and uplifting. Listen to this woman explain why she's voting for Donald Trump.
Gentlemen, please welcome Madeleine Brain from New York.
Good evening, everyone. My son, Sergeant Hassan Korea, an Afghanistan War retired veteran. He received enemy fire from the Taliban, only to be murdered with a knife on the streets of New York City. The 4 assailants responsible for his death initially were facing justice. But that changed when District Attorney Alvin Bragg was elected.
Alvin Bragg, of course, is the district attorney who prosecuted Trump on that ridiculous hush money case with the ex-porn star.
Suddenly, 2 of the homicidal maniacs responsible for my son's death had their gang assault and murder charges completely dismissed. One of them received 14 months time served. Alvin Bragg charged her with assault with a shoe. And another one was sentenced to 7 years. I later learned that Alvin Bragg often dismisses and reduces dangerous criminals. He wants to clear the jails and return violent felons onto our streets every day. The injustice was devastating for me and my family. I don't want anyone else to experience the senseless pain that many other victims across this United States of America have to live with every day. So I decided to use the voice that God gave me to be the voice for the voiceless across America. We need justice for victims, and we need accountability for prosecutors who fail in their duty. Soft on crime prosecutors like Alvin Bragg in New York, Kim Foxx in Chicago, and George Gascon in Los Angeles have turned our great country and cities into war zones. Poor and neglected communities like mine are suffering. And who else in here is sick and tired of being sick and tired?
Beautiful. That is beautiful. Love it. What a line.
The Democratic Party that poor minorities have been loyal to for decades, including myself, all right? They betrayed us. They stabbed us in the back. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who claim to represent us, have abandoned us. They neglected the poor minority communities across America. But mine eyes have been opened. Just like so many other poor minorities across America. Donald Trump shares our values, love of God and family and country. He's been a victim of the same corrupt system that I have been and my family has been. He is committed to providing economic opportunities, helping those suffering from addiction with long-term inpatient drug programs, rolling back deadly bans policies that are getting our children killed every single day, and supporting our police. We back the NYPD. We back the blue.
Oh, it's just phenomenal. Just phenomenal. And this is because this was a former Democrat saying, I've had enough. I've had enough. And this is the kind of enthusiasm we need in Canada to fight back.
NYPD, black the blue. Trump was right when he said, they're after us. He's just standing in the way. And guess what? He always will. That's why I'm standing with him today. Let's make America safe again. And re-elect our Donald J. Trump.
Phenomenal. That was just phenomenal. I can't say enough about that speech. And I played the whole thing because I couldn't cut it. Because she's saying what I feel, what you feel, what so many Canadians feel, and we need to get up with that kind of passion and that kind of determination and to speak our minds and to say we are sick and tired of being sick and tired of this liberal government in Canada, of Trudeau using and abusing us, of being sucked dry by the federal government, having our taxpayers siphoned from us with his goddamn carbon tax and giving a few dollars back in return, and then claiming falsely that we're getting more back, and 8 out of 10 Canadians are getting more back. This government is not only a consequential thief, it's a chronic liar. And it's time to say, just as Madeline said at the convention last night in Milwaukee, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and we are going to move more forward with change in this country. And I tell you, if any politician can grasp that, he needs to latch on not to the negativity, but to the idea that the people still matter, that your vote still matters, that you still have the power to say no. And we in Canada, like those Americans who are at that convention, are going to say no. Anyway, thank you for watching today. This has been a joy to bring this information to you. I might even be broadcasting again tonight during the convention. But I appreciate your viewing, and I'll be back again very soon with more of the news that you need to hear.